started talking about somebody last week. Who remembers? Who did we start talking about last week? Pastor? Nope, that was the week before. Lucas, do you remember? Sorry?
I thought it was Pastor.
Oh, okay. No, it wasn't Pastor. It was a man in the Bible.
Jeremiah?
It sounds like Jeremiah, but it starts with an N. Nehemiah, that's right. Nehemiah, very good. And did he live in the land of Israel? No. He was from the land of Israel, but he didn't live there anymore. Why didn't he live there?
Because he was a wine bearer or cupbearer for the king in Babylon.
Yes, in Babylon. In Shushan, actually, where the capital city, where the palace was. Okay, that's what his job was. Why was it an important job? And also perhaps a dangerous job. Juliana?
So I think the danger part is that some people put like poison stuff. So Nehemiah eats or drinks it first to check if it's okay.
Exactly. If it wasn't, he would be dead and not the king. So, an important job. The king had to trust him, didn't he? And the king came to trust him, and even though he was a servant, the king often talked to him about things that he would talk to a friend about because he trusted him. Now, Nehemiah, do you remember what nationality he is? He's Jewish. And why were the Jewish people living in Babylon instead of in Israel?
Because Jerusalem was destroyed.
And why was it destroyed? You're right. Yep.
I don't remember the name, but some people came over and they had a war, and the Jews were not listening to God very well, so God let the enemy tribes take over Jews.
Exactly. And God had warned them many, many times, stop your sinning, repent, return to me, or else I will send punishment. And that punishment will be an enemy army. They'll come, they'll fight, they'll win, and then they'll take you back as slaves to their country. And that's why they were not in their home country. They were in Babylon. Now, he received some bad news in our story last week. Do you remember what the bad news was? It was really sad. Ivana? You forgot. His brother gave him the bad news. His brother was where? Yes, his brother had gone to Jerusalem, and he came back and he told them something that made Nehemiah very sad. What did he tell him about Jerusalem?
Jerusalem's in ruins.
Yeah, the walls were broken down. The gates had been burned. Was the city in danger? Yeah, it wasn't protected from enemies or wild animals. Now, before this, some Jews had been set free by King Cyrus, a Persian king. And do you remember how many of them went back to Israel? It was a big number. 50,000. And he let them go back, and what did they do? Obviously, they didn't rebuild the walls. The walls are still destroyed. What did they rebuild? Do you remember? They rebuilt the temple, which is today we would call the church. They called it the temple, where they worshiped God. So the temple had been rebuilt, but not the walls, and many of the houses were still not rebuilt. So that made Nehemiah very sad. Now, why was it dangerous to be sad in the presence of the king? Yeah?
I think when you like a disobedient king, you may be put on trial, or you might execute you.
Yeah, he could execute you for something as simple as having a sad face. You were not allowed, you were forbidden to be sad in the presence of the king. That's terrible, isn't it? But Nehemiah was a trusted servant, even a friend to the king, and so the king asked him, what's wrong? Now, what had Nehemiah been praying for since he heard that Jerusalem was in ruins?
To help Jerusalem.
To be able to help Jerusalem. Could he just get up and go? No, he was a servant of the king. He couldn't just leave if he wanted to leave, could he? So he was praying for an opportunity to be able to talk to the king, to ask permission to go back, and maybe even ask the king's help. And so when the king asked him, why are you so sad? He realized this is my chance to tell the king about Jerusalem. He told the king, and what did the king do? What? No. He helped them, that's right. Because he understood, if my father's city, my grandfather's city was in ruins, I would be sad too. And so Nehemiah has a good reason to be sad. And so the king agreed that Nehemiah could go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. And Nehemiah asked him for something else besides just permission to go back. Resources. Nehemiah was a servant. Did he have money to buy the supplies to build? No. So the king agreed to give him the resources, and he also gave him letters to prove that the king said it was okay for him to travel. That was for his safety. Well, it took some planning. The day finally came when Nehemiah and a small group of Jews were going to go back to Jerusalem with him to help him. But the king also sent some soldiers to be his bodyguard. Wow, that's pretty important, isn't it? Yeah, it's good for Nehemiah because it was going to be a dangerous trip. But it also showed that Nehemiah was a man who was important in the eyes of the king. And so people would know that they shouldn't mess with Nehemiah because the king had sent his own soldiers to protect him. That's a good thing, isn't it? And so they left, and do you know how far it was? Let me see if I have a map. I think I have a map here. I'll show you. Okay, so they are in Shushan. The palace right over here. Nope, over here. So they're in Shushan, and they have to travel all the way to Jerusalem. Could they fly? No. Could they take a train? No. Car? No. How would they have to travel? Donkeys, camels, horses, and walking. If you notice, they're doing what? They're walking, aren't they? The only person riding, actually, is the soldier. So, it was 700 miles. It's hard to know that in kilometers. Let's just say 1,000. Okay, maybe it was 1,000 kilometers. That's a good number. How long do you think it would take you to walk that far? Okay, you're closer. It took them 3 months. Can you imagine? That's a long walk, isn't it? But they were carrying things. If they were just walking with no backpacks or rucksacks or anything like that, maybe they could walk faster. But they aren't carrying things. Their donkeys are carrying things. Slows you down a little bit, doesn't it? So it took them a long time. And it was good that they had the soldiers along because there were bandits along the way. What are bandits? People who rob you. They're almost like pirates, but on land, not in a ship, right? Well, they were looking forward to getting to Jerusalem. Would you be looking forward to it?
me.
Well, I think I'd just be glad to have my trip done, wouldn't you? That's a long trip, a lot of walking. Well, we don't know how Nehemiah or anybody else felt, but eventually in the distance they saw the city of Jerusalem. I think that they felt relief for one, don't you? We can finally stop walking. But they were probably excited as well. They had reached their destination. They had reached the place where they had been traveling to. Well, do you think anybody was there to greet them and welcome them? Nope. Nobody was there saying, "Oh, we're so glad you're here. Welcome back." No, nobody probably knew they were coming, or maybe just a few, but they didn't care. They were busy with their own life. So there was no welcoming committee, nobody to make them feel welcome. Well, there were some people that knew of their coming. And do they look happy about it? No. These two men were governors, not of Jerusalem, but of neighboring areas near Jerusalem, Sanballat and Tobiah. Now, they hated the Jewish people. So were they kind to them? No. And you know what? They were happy that Jerusalem's walls were broken down and the gates were burned, because Jerusalem couldn't be a great city if the walls were broken down and the gates were burned, and they didn't want Jerusalem to be greater than their city. They didn't want Jerusalem to be safe. They wanted it to be vulnerable or exposed, so if they had some of their evil plans, they wouldn't be stopped. But if the walls were built, these two men who were enemies could plot all kinds of things and do them, couldn't they? And so they were not very happy. And they have a third friend, but he didn't show up just yet. And they came and they said, "What are you doing here?" Do you think Nehemiah told them what he was there for? Nope, not right away. In fact, Nehemiah hadn't told anybody there. He waited for 3 whole days before he decided to inspect the city. And he didn't do it in broad daylight. He waited until the nighttime, because he still wanted to keep it quiet until he knew for sure how much work it would take to do the job. Well, in order to do that, he'd have to go out and look at it, wouldn't he? Walk all the way around the city. That would be not as long a walk as 3 months. He could do it in one night, but it would still be a long walk all the way around the city. Well, as you can see, this is the kind of thing that he saw. And the Bible tells us that he started his trip around the city at the Valley Gate. And there's a lot of gates, aren't there? Not just one gate to the city. He's going to have a lot of gates to fix, isn't he? They all have different names, like the Sheep Gate. You know why they called it the Sheep Gate?
It's the gate where the sheep went.
That's right. And you know, they came through this gate on purpose because it was very near the temple where they worshiped God. Now, when they sinned, what did they have to do to get forgiveness for their sins? They had to sacrifice a sheep, didn't they? And so the sheep were brought in here. It was near the temple, and so it was called the Sheep Gate. Now, sacrificing a sheep, we don't have to do that anymore, do we? Why don't we have to sacrifice a sheep or a lamb? Because Jesus was the perfect sacrifice, wasn't he? These sheep, these lambs, they weren't perfect sacrifices, but they offered them in faith, looking forward to the promised Savior who was coming. Now that the promised Savior, God's sinless Son, Jesus Christ, has come, we don't need to offer sheep anymore, do we? Well, then there was the fish gate. What do you think they brought in through the fish gate? That's right. There was the Jordan River nearby. They could have went fishing in the Jordan River. The Sea of Galilee wasn't that far away. And there were lots of fish in the Sea of Galilee. And I think they liked fish. Do you guys like fish? No. Yeah, some of you do, some of you don't.
Fish.
It's okay.
Well,
I like some fish.
The bones, the bones.
Yeah, I like the bones either. I like steam because the bones are big enough you can steam it, pull them out before you put it in your mouth. Anyway, then there was an old gate. Maybe it was their first gate in Jerusalem. We don't know, but for some reason they called it the Old Gate.
Yeah, because of Jesus.
I think so. Then the Valley Gate, the gate that went out into the valley. And then this is the Dung Gate was next. Now, this is the gate they took out all the things they wanted to throw into was a big pit where you guys, what do we have where they take our rubbish? Yes, the dump. So, they had a dump outside the city, and they called it the Dung Gate. Anything that was to be thrown away went out this gate. I bet it didn't smell very good. What do you think? No, probably not. Then there was the Fountain Gate and the Water Gate, because there was no water inside Jerusalem at that time. They'd go outside the city to get water. So both of these gates were near where they would get their water. I wonder what came through this gate. The horse gate. The king and the soldiers, they would have horses, and the horses would come in through this gate. Then in the eastern wall, there was a gate just as they called the East Gate. Very creative name because it was in the east wall. Then there's the Mifkad Gate. It's a foreign word, isn't it? This was the gate that the soldiers came in and out of. They would go out of it to fight battles, and when they were done with the battle, hopefully they won, they would come back in through this gate. And we're back to the Sheep Gate. That's a lot of gates. How many? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 gates. That's a lot of gates, isn't it? So he has to figure out how to get the wood for the gates. You definitely need wood for the gates. So does he have permission to get wood? Yeah, because he asked the king for a letter to give to the man who's in charge of the king's forest.
Why would they use wood for gates? It's like they need something about it.
Well, they didn't really have a lot of metals like we do, or not as plenteous, I think. And it was more affordable for sure. But even in Ireland, a lot of their old gates were made out of wood, weren't they, in the castles? Yeah, so gates being made out of wood is a really, really old tradition. Well, he knew now what the city needed. It was going to take a lot of work, and he needed help. Could he do it all himself? Now, he needed at least one other person to help him, right? But he really needed a lot of people so that he could get it done in a good amount of time. So he called together the leaders of the people that had already been living there, and he told them that his brother had come back to Shushan and told them about Jerusalem. And he was there to help, and he had the king's permission to rebuild the walls and the gates. And the people listened. And then they said, "We will arise and build." They agreed with him. You think they loved their city? Yeah, they did. But they had been discouraged up until now. Nobody else had cared. Nobody had set out to lead them to build the wall. But now Nehemiah was here. He cared, and he was going to lead them, and he was able to get the supplies, the resources they needed. And so they said, "We will help you. We will arise and build." Well, guess who also heard that they were going to do that? Those two governors, Sanballat and Tobiah, and their friend Geshem. It's kind of a different name, isn't it? Well, they heard, and they came over, and they didn't say, "We'll help too." They didn't come over and say, "Oh, what a good idea." They came over and they laughed at the Jews, and they made fun of them, and then they accused them of a crime. They said, "You are going to do this so you can rebel against the king of Persia." What does it mean to rebel, especially rebel against a king or rebel against a government? A revolution, that's right. And in the king's eyes, that's definitely a crime. We're supposed to do what to the king? We're supposed to obey, aren't we? And was that the reason why they were going to build the city? No. They loved the city, and they loved God, and they knew it was the city where the special place to worship God was. And so they wanted that city to be a city of honor, a great city, once again, because they loved God. And they wanted God's place to be a special place. Should we love our country? Yeah. So we don't. Now, how many of you are from Ireland?
No.
Okay. Where are you from? Lithuania. Philippines. Okay. And I believe Sarah's from Brazil. You guys were born here in Ireland, though, weren't you? Yeah. You were born here. They were born here. Were you guys born here? Oh, you were born in England. All right. So you probably have a special place in your heart for the country that you're from. Yeah. You go back and visit, and it's special, isn't it? But what about loving Ireland? Should we love the country that we're in? Yeah. Are we free? Are we free to worship God? Yeah. Do we have our needs met? We have food, eat, clothes to wear, a roof over our head. We can all get education. We live in a good country, don't we? And so we should love it, and we should be grateful or thankful that God has allowed us to live here. All right.
Is that only for short?
Huh? It is short. All right. Now, I'm going to take one, and I'm going to ask Juliana.
It's so easy.
It is very short. We'll talk about what it means in just a second when you all have it. The very first word is a very long word. Righteousness. Who knows what righteousness means? Okay. Or to live right, do what's right as well. And that's part of what you're saying there. Be honest and truthful. Okay. Now, righteousness, obeying God, doing what is right, what does it do? It exalteth a nation. What does that mean? Righteousness exalteth a nation.
It's like exalted is not this thing. It's like kind of like praise, basically, I don't know, upgrade.
Upward, yes, okay. So it lifts a nation, doesn't it? It exalts a nation, it's praiseworthy, and has both of those ideas, which I think I heard you say the word praise as well. So righteousness is praiseworthy, or makes a nation praiseworthy. Righteousness lifts a nation, or makes a nation great. So how can we help Ireland, that's where we live, how can we help Ireland to be a good place? Okay, by sharing the gospel with other people, but also by us living right, being righteous, living right, obeying God. Because what does that do? That encourages other people to live right in righteousness, lifts a place, lifts a nation. But the opposite, but sin, is a reproach. What does reproach mean? Sorry? It means like a disgrace or to be ashamed. Are you guys ever ashamed of something that you do? When we do wrong, do you feel happy about it or kind of guilty and ashamed? I don't know, but when I do something wrong, I feel ashamed. Yeah, so sin, what is sin again? You guys know, remember from Neighborhood Bible Time? From Bible time? Sin is anything I think, anything I do, which breaks God's law, makes God unhappy because we disobeyed Him. So any of those things, it brings shame to any people. Would you want to live in a country that was Where lots of crime was?
No.
Where there was always fighting and killing? No, why? You'd be ashamed of that, wouldn't you? Now, if there's war and you're defending your country, that's a little different, isn't it? But if it's just crime, you wouldn't want to live there, would you? You would want to look for someplace else to live. Why? Because sin brings shame. It brings reproach to any people. All right. Let's say this together a few times, and then we'll let you say it. Ready? Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34. Let's do it again. Ready? Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34. One more time. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34. Juliana.
Righteousness
Exalteth
a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34.
All right, very good. Okay. All right. Lucas.
Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34.
Good. All right. Not that, Josh. All right.
Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34.
Okay, Isaac.
Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34.
Okay, then you say it. What's your friend's name?
Nation, but reproach to People. Proverbs 14, 34.
Would you like to say it?
Can I try saying without looking?
No, me too.
Okay. Everybody else. Okay.
Righteousness, exalt. How do you say it? Exalt a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14. Righteousness exalts a nation. Come on.
Go ahead.
Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 8.
Good. Can you say it without looking back? Okay, turn your paper over. Approach Can you say that? Okay, no looking. Go ahead. Okay, I only have one extra. There, okay.
They let the room burn.
Okay.
You can buy it at Tesco for $2. I
All right. Now we're going to sing the verse from last week. All right. I think I have it in here. Let me see. Called a hernia. Oh, here it is. Okay, let's sing this. Ready? They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, true way. Okay, let's do it one more time. This is the new song. Ready? They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. horse song.
And also yellow horse.
Yep, you're right. There's a yellow horse too, right? Did you ever talk to God? Tell him that you need a friend to love. Pray in Jesus' name, believing that God answers prayer. Have you told him all your cares and woes? Every time you interfere, he knows you can know he'll always hear, and he will answer prayer. You can cry when you're alone to him. You don't have to pray aloud to him. He knows your thoughts. On a lofty mountain peak, he's there. In the meadow by your stream, he's there. Anywhere on earth you go, he's been there from the start. Find the answer in his word. It's true. You'll be strong because he walks with you. By his faithfulness he'll change you too. God answers prayer.
Very deeply, Lord.
All right, let's sing our let's sing this one. You guys remember this one, right? You got your arms ready? Ready? I've got joy down in my heart. Deep down in my heart. J-O-Y down in my heart. Deep down in my heart. Jesus gave it to me, and nothing can destroy it. I've got joy down in my heart. Deep down in my heart. Okay, this time we're just going to say J-O-Y. Ready? J-O-Y down in my heart. Deep down in my heart. J-O-Y down in my heart. Deep down in my heart. Jesus gave it to me, and nothing can destroy it. J-O-Y down in my heart. Deep down in my heart. Oh my. Oh, you guys don't know this one, do you? Why worry when you can pray? Trust Jesus, he'll be your stay. Don't be a doubting Thomas. Rest fully on his promise. Why worry when you can pray? You guys have it this week?
Yeah, only Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Yeah, me for
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, yeah?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
And not Thursday and not Friday?
No!
Monday.
Oh no, so on Wednesday.
And then there's a door to just go. Do you guys have plans for St. Patrick's Day?
Eat food until I'm dead.
No, hopefully not. Because they're very, very cold. Is anybody going into the parade? Is there a parade out here?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. You're not going to the parade?
Yeah, you're right. Every single time.
Oh, okay. You guys know that on Friday, that's the day after St. Patrick's Day, there is a party here for you guys.
Yeah.
I hope my friends won't take this very late.
Oh.
Wait, what time
It
is it?
is from, let's see, you guys remember?
11 to 1.
11 to 1.
Oh, no,
8 in the morning. Yeah, 11 a.m. till 1. So that means we will have some pizza. You don't like pizza, do you?
Yeah.
We'll have pizza and ice cream. And we'll also play some games and we will do a craft. Does that sound like fun?
Can we just play basketball?
Yes!
Can we go rent a gym for the
Yes!
We can bring in 10-year-old.
Oh, I don't know. We would have to, not this time. We'll think about it for another time, though. Adana. What games are we playing?
No!
Hey guys, let's not get too loud because they're so. Mr. Andrew is doing the games, but I think it's going to be a lot of games, different games with potatoes. It'll be fun or funny, both. Hopefully. All right. Well, we won't do anything with cooking, but that's all I know for now. But I think it'll be fun. All right. Let's say goodbye to everybody online.
Bye.